With that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, who will then go through and will introduce the panel and then get started on her questions. Sue.
Hi. Yep. Welcome to this first webinar on bike fitting. We realize that not all of you are bike fitters, and that's a good thing. So when we ask, we'll be discussing questions that hopefully will be presented at a level that you can understand. If you, as a guest to this meeting, do not understand something, please post a question in the chat, or if you would like to post a question, we'll try to get to it. We do have a defined set of questions that we will be focusing on in general. And if you are in the guest gallery, please make sure that your audio is not on. Okay, so what we want to do is have each of these individuals introduce themselves. So we'll go around clockwise, sort of, with one in the middle, which means from my clockwise, that means we're going to start with Rick Schultz, and he'll briefly introduce who he is, and then we'll move on to Justin.
Okay, Rick Schultz here from Bike Fitness Coaching. I've been bike fitting for probably 15 years now, and along with my daughter, who's a physical therapist as well as some of the others on the panel, we've put together our own education system that's kind of evolved and merged in with the IBFI upcoming education system. I like Andy to at least give a little couple-minute blurb on what the IBFI is and where they're going and how that's going to benefit all people being fit on bicycles. Okay, so that's Rick. How about Justin?
Hi, I'm Justin Lucke. I'm with Revolutions of Fitness, and Curtis, who's also on this call. I've got a long history in cycling. I've been racing mountain bikes since I was 15 in 1989. So I've been doing this for quite a while. And come into the industry a little bit obliquely. I started my adult life as a lawyer, did a couple of different things in there, professional chef for a while. Ultimately ended up working in a bike shop, actually City Cycle in San Francisco, way post Clay Mankin, but definitely in the existing aura of that temple of bike fit, and got connected with Curtis, who I already knew, and just rolled into doing bike fit about 10 years ago, and it's just been fantastic. Come at it very much from a bike side. I'm a huge bike guy, always raced bikes and love bikes, and so yeah.
Hey, nice to meet you. How about Andy?
Okay, so my name's Andy Brooke. I started fitting 2010, so 13 years now. Big fan of learning and education, so I've done probably 16 different bike fit courses across the world now, and started the IBFI about 10 years ago, with the objective of kind of professionalizing the industry, driving standards in education and fitting. And one of the big changes that Rick's already alluded to is the new common syllabus that we've worked on recently and launched. So hopefully it'll be easier for new and early career fitters to identify a path towards a fairly decent level of training, and not have to sort of go back to level 1 every time they want to start a new course with a new provider. So lots of exciting stuff coming there.
Okay, thank you. Wendy? Unmute yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Wendy Holliday. I'm a physical therapist and a bike fitter, and I like to sort of merge the two together to do a lot of medical bike fits. I've done quite a bit of research in the background, and yeah, I just enjoy learning more stuff and putting it all together in a practical situation. So that's me.
All right, we're going to move up to Happy, so C's in the middle. Please introduce yourself. Yep.
My name is Happy Friedman. I am the founder of the Center for Bike Fit here in New York. I spent 20 years at the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York City developing a clinical bike fitting program, and my fitting goes back to 1978 when I started. So I'm not certified by anybody. I've been on Andy's board. I've worked with Curtis at Medicine of Cycling, where I was one of the original faculty. So I've been around the block a couple of times.
Well, it's nice to have you. Okay, Curtis?
It's a pleasure.
Thanks for inviting me. This is should be fun. Curtis Cramblett, physical therapist, certified functional manual therapist. Over 30 years now at PT, which is crazy to say. Taught for just about every organization out there, jumped through most of their certifications here or there, whether it be Retool, FIST, SICI, Bike PT, BikeFit.com. We ran medicine and cycling on the bike fit side for quite a years, and then also have a racing, with a very low level racing history, both mountain bikes and road bikes over the last 30 plus years as well.
All right. Well, it's nice to meet all you. My background really briefly is I'm a professor of neuroscience, but I am absolutely passionate about cycling. I have been my whole life, and maybe my new career will be in bike fitting. I've started to learn how to do this, and so I'm really interested in hearing what you all have to say. And I do read what you are publishing, and I do think about what you're doing. So I'm sort of a neutral party in a big way. But I appreciate every one of you and what you're doing for cyclists. And so we're going to start. We have groups of questions, and Wendy, I've grouped them according to what I think is your wheelhouse. If you aren't directly asked to answer a question first, but you have comments on it, please raise your hand either using the raise your hand function or just wave, and I will make sure that you have a chance to respond. So the first question is going to go to, I think we're going to do this for Wendy. And so make sure you're on, that's right. So the first question is some people will wonder, what is a medical bike fit? And how does it differ from a standard bike fit?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's something that comes up quite often, both from bike fitters as well as from, cyclists. And I don't think there's a specific definition. I think you'll find across the board people will do different medical fits depending on what their qualification is. So the way that I see, or the way that I conduct my medical fits, is it's more focus on the body, and it's focusing on if somebody has an injury or a discomfort or pain, and really trying to get to the cause of that, perhaps off the bike, but ensuring that anything that is happening on the bike isn't aggravating their condition. So there's no point in treating somebody with physical therapy for 10 sessions and they don't get better, because perhaps their saddle is too low and that's what's aggravating their knee pain. So for me, a medical bike fit is really concentrating on the human body on the bike as well as off the bike, and ensuring that the bike fit is correct for them in that particular situation. The bike fit often gets changed. So we talk about, an accommodated fit versus an optimal fit. And I will work with somebody. So I might say to them, we're going to leave you in this position whilst we do your rehab, and then we will come back to your bike and start making adjustments to get you into a more optimal performance position later on. So so a bike fit, I think it depends on what your qualification is, what your background is. But for me as a physical therapist, I tend to concentrate more on the body with a medical bike fit versus a standard fit. A standard fit would be generally for performance, and a medical fit would be for your injury or your discomfort, and really trying to focus on what the cause is. Is that the bike, or is it something on the body? And usually it's both.
Okay, thank you. Happy, would you like to respond?
Yes, you have to be very careful about people claiming to do medical bike fits. In New York State, there is no case law, there is no documentation in any law written or bills, and anybody can claim to be a medical bike fitter. It is open territory until there is a legally defined reason to be a medical bike fitter. I had this discussion last week with a lawyer who specializes in cycling, and he said anyone who wants can claim to be a medical bike fitter. So you have to really look at the credentials of people who tell you they have a medical practice.
That's a really good point. Curtis, you had a comment?
And I would add on to what Wendy said is I can start to give a hypothesis around a cause, then I try to accommodate around that problem. So if someone has knee pain and it's being driven by tight hamstring, let's say, I might run a seat height a little bit lower than is optimal for performance to take stress off of the tissue I think is causing the problem. So for me, a medical bike fit usually has an accommodative side to it to take stress off of a problem. Or one other example is someone has a herniated disc or a lot of low back pain. I might take stress off of the low back by raising up the cockpit or decreasing or increasing the cockpit length to, again, to decrease stress on the tissue. So that's the addition I'd add for a medical bike fit, to take stress off of a underlying driver or cause.
Okay, well, we'll have one more comment. Andy.
So more of a question then,
Okay.
to Curtis, if that's okay.
Sure.
So in your first example there, if you think there's a tight hamstring and you're going to run a lower seat, how is that different to a non-medical fit? Would a non-medical fit do the same thing in that instance?
Yeah, so would a non-medical fit do the same thing? If someone has a tight hamstring and it's causing them pain, if I lower the seat, I might decrease performance. And so how big of an issue is the performance for them? So in short, the pain is the underlying driver for me, and I'll drop the seat if it's giving them pain. But if they're a professional or elite athlete and it's not giving them pain, and I believe that the higher seat height is going to allow them to perform better, then I might not, knowing that in the back of my head that long term that might getting them trouble. So in short, I might or I might not. Great question, Andy. It's blurry. It depends is the answer.
I can see where there wouldn't be a defined line. It's gray zone. And actually even the fit decisions in that range probably skirt sort of medical, but sort of not. So thank you for all of you who answered that one. The next one I have is for Justin. It's a little bit no. All right, we got Rick.
So since most bike fitters are non-medical, they don't have a medical background, where do you draw the line, either Wendy or Curtis, as to how far you think a regular bike fitter should go until they then consult a PT or somebody else with a medical background? So where is that line?
For me, it's the pain that keeps reoccurring. So they've been in not once, but 2 or 3 times, and they continue to have that symptom. Number one. Number two, red flags. They've got burning down their leg. They've got a diagnosis of a herniated disc, or other hot red flags. I wake up in the middle of the night with this pain. That would be number 2. Number 3 is off the bike pain. This not only bothers me when I ride for, a couple of hours, but anytime I sit, I get that numbness in my foot. So off the bike pain would probably be number 3. And Wendy, as a PT, want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think, I absolutely agree with what you say, but it also comes down to the bike fitter and knowing what their qualifications are, and to a point where, I can't help you that I need to be on, which is why it's so important that we build those relationships with the bike shops and with the bike fitters who are doing the non-medical bike fits. They don't have that medical background, and to be seen not as competition, but to work together with others. And I think it really boils down to knowing your limitations and what you can do and what you can't do. And sometimes people do go to somebody who isn't medically trained and have great results just by changing something on the bike. It can help them. And then other instances, like what Curtis has mentioned, they might need somebody who is sort of more medically trained to help them. I also think that bike fitters who aren't medically trained really should be working with somebody or have somebody that they can refer to and have a good relationship with them, so that the client is the one that benefits, and we all benefit at the end of the day by getting back on the bike and riding.
Good.
Okay, we'll have one more comment on this because this seems to be an important question. Okay, Andy, what do you have to say?
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of add to that. So I gave a fairly bad introduction, but to give a bit more of a rounded intro to who I am. I started the IBFI because I was a big fan of education, and I wanted to raise standards, and but I also am a big fan of educating myself, and that's both traditional academia. I've got a couple of master's degrees. One's in sport and exercise science, and I've studied a part-time PhD for about 6 years, and that's on pause now, but it will eventually get finished. And as a non-medical fitter, I think it's important to kind of see things from the other perspective as well. So Wendy's exactly nailed it. There's a point where we have to say, as non-medical fitters, we've reached the limit of our knowledge and our expertise. This is not a bike issue, this is a medical issue, and we have to refer it. So we've got to find partners around us to pair with, and we describe that in the IBFI's new common syllabus. We make sure that this is taught to all new fitters, that it's really, really important, this concept of a multidisciplinary team. You know, if I was going to work with pro and elite athletes, I would be a bike fitter, and then they would have a doctor, they would have a PT, they would have a host of other people that specialize in their field. That's what this multidisciplinary team is all about, and there's no reason you can't offer that to the average client. You know, if I'm doing a fit, I think Curtis mentioned pain off the bike. That's a big red flag for me. If it's aggravated by anything other than cycling, that's a red flag for me. And if there's a diagnosed medical condition, you know, I think they're the big distinctions. If we're talking about, so the reason I asked Curtis that question earlier is, you know, as a non-medical fitter, I'm quite happy to identify a tight hamstring and then potentially run an accommodative position for that. If it's the tight hamstring that's causing discomfort, if it's on bike discomfort, if lowering the seat actually helps. You know, if there's a whole medical thing behind that changes those answers, then that's the point where I'm referring out to somebody else. But I think it is a bit more grey than we can really define, but it's something we just need to be open with. And I think that multidisciplinary team approach really, really helps, because people don't remember that you couldn't fix the problem. They remember that you put them in touch with the person that did fix the problem. So you were still involved in that, and you still get a good reputation as part of that. You don't need to feel like you have to do everything yourself.
That's a good point. I think there's a lot of pressure on the individual bike fitter when they're in the situation of a fit and actually carrying one out, that you know, they might mention, well, you know, I have this or this, and your temptation for some might be, oh, well, we can do that. And I think the restraint that you guys seem to have is good, and that you constantly monitor the situation to make sure that you're comfortable with the suggestions you're making. So that's a good thing. All right, and that's a good thing. Wait, okay. One last thing. Okay.
One last thing is, so you got to, in my opinion, you got to be careful in let's talk about this specific case of lowering the saddle, because so often you then transfer the problem onto a different part of the body. If you lower the saddle, now you're adding more flexion to the top of the pedal stroke. There's more pressure on the patellofemoral joint, increasing possible pain and erosion of the patella, of the articular cartilage and other stuff like that. So yeah, it's a delicate balance of one to the other. And a real quick story to drive that home is, I had a client come in a couple of years ago. He was 260 pounds, and we did a bike fit for him. He called me a year later and he said, you know, this bike fit is not working. I just can't get comfortable on the bike. And I go, what happened? What changed? He said, well, I lost 100 pounds. And I said, well, you're not the same guy as you came. So basically, this is like Wendy started. This is an ever evolving. The bike fit done today is where you are today, not where you're going to be or where you were. So that's one important thing to notice for the bike fitters, that be very careful when you adjust something, because you could potentially move that problem to somewhere else on the body. Curtis?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and an accommodated fit definitely takes stress off of a tissue, but by definition, accommodation is taking away something from something else. A 50 millimeter stem might make a back comfortable, but it might not handle that well. And so that really becomes critical to monitor as we make these trade-offs. One other note is that we keep talking about the medical team, the PT, et cetera, but the medical team is also the physician that should be involved.
Yeah.
And part of this team should also be the coach that's helping the athlete or the strength and conditioning professional. So just to think outside of the fitter, the PT, and all the people that are involved in this cyclist's life, if that's appropriate, especially for the higher level teams.
Good point. Good point. Okay.
Okay, so we're going to move on. I mean, the next question isn't quite so, well, maybe it is. It's pretty straightforward, but Justin, it's going to be yours to start with. And I don't want you to think less of it. But a lot of things online there are online sort of fit sites that the average cyclist out there, beginner, might actually run onto and start looking at. And one of the things they always want you to do to determine perhaps the size of your bike is they say, measure your inseam. All right. Well, this question is not inconsequential, but the question really is does the inseam, we wear jeans with an inseam, but the inseam goes to your ankle. So if this is from my point of view, all right, are you measuring it from your crotch to your floor or the crotch to your ankle? I mean, it's a silly question, but go ahead.
Fair. I mean, the point of measuring it, just stepping back from that, just to talk about measuring in general, there was a whole period, when you go back to like the fit kit where you were getting really extensive body measurements, and there was even fit systems that were based around sort of abstract body measurements, and it just doesn't take into account the person or the whole person or mobility overall and how that person interacts with the bicycle. So, I mean, first of all, just measurements in general can be kind of misleading if that's your only reference point. But from my perspective, particularly when you're trying to decide on a bike perspective, the inseam measurement isn't the thing. It isn't like I wear a 36 pants or whatever. It's more noise in the background. It's more what's standover clearance, and almost every frame geometry chart that is in existence has a standover clearance measurement, and that's a functional question. And so you measure it in shoes and with your legs straight, standing straight up, and it's really helpful to have somebody help you with that. I mean, there's the whole put a book against a wall thing and yada yada yada, but it's hard to do it by yourself. And then the way I was always taught to measure that was to go to use like a large level and have the top edge of that touching your shield tuberosity, and that level, and then that's your reference point for standover clearance, and it's sort of like true leg length as opposed to or really functional leg length. And then you can take that number and you can say, oh well, when you're screening bikes, it's not just stack and reach, it's also standover clearance, and it helps filter out bikes that maybe like have a really really level top tube, and you're really borderline whether or not you can comfortably stand over that bike.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if that needs any more clarification. Oh, you want to say something, Happy? Okay.
Oh, it definitely needs some clarification.
Okay, go
because
ahead.
you can measure people you can measure people in the morning and get a different measurement than you're going to get in the afternoon or evening. So you got to take that into account when you're measuring for any joint. You got to look at the bike you're designing. Are we building a track bike? Are we building a road bike? What's the seat angle going to be? You also have to look at wheel size. Are you considering 650s or 700s? Because that will also affect the clearance. So there's a lot of variables besides the inseam just to get the seat tube. I usually don't worry about calculating a seat tube length till much later. And yes, I measure to the malleolus when I'm looking for a leg length because it's a uniform point you can find.
Okay.
You can't, arch height changes, Therefore, the bottom of the foot relationship changes. So you need to look at a bigger picture.
Okay, well, that's a good point. Andy.
So I think measuring inside leg gets a bad rep because we're trying to move on to a point where we're taking more information on board. But ultimately, I guess it's kind of like any modeling approach. And a couple of you guys were at ICS a few years ago over in Germany, and Sebastian, I've completely forgotten his surname, was talking about modeling for a time trial event, and they were looking at wind direction and wheel weights and rotational weights and all these kinds of different things, and everybody just ate it up completely. And the reason for that was that the model had a lot of variables and a lot of detail, so the formula was a little bit more advanced. Now, if we think of inseam as being wheel weight, then we're not taking into account aerodynamics, we're not taking into account wind direction, all those kinds of things. So I think it can be a part of the puzzle that helps to inform these things. But as Curtis said in the comments, there's just too little information from that one piece of data. So I guess the answer to the broader question, can manufacturers accurately identify bike size based on inseam? No, they can't. And so should go for a bike fit. That's the answer.
All right, I'm going to go back to Justin.
Yeah, I mean, just following up on all those again, like the only like the point is it's a limiting factor potentially, and it's not deciding what size bikes you can get. But if I measure your inseam that way, the functional inseam, I'm not talking about anatomical. It's standover clearance, and if your inseam measures it 800 millimeters and the bike standover clearance is 830, that's going to be a problem. And just knowing that helps filter the narrow the scope of the bike choice, and it's one of the variables to look at.
Okay, because I mean, as a naive, if there are people who are just buying bicycles, I mean, you guys don't just go out and buy a bicycle. I mean, you probably research it to death. Okay, so a person that goes into a bike shop, they may not even know what the sizes of the bikes are that are available. So it is one of the things that a bike shop might actually use as a start point. And I guess my only last question to clarify this is if it seems like there's a range of bike size that would work for an individual. And it seems that Justin's suggesting that if you're not able to clear, that's not good. So does that mean that any bicycle that's smaller than that allows you to do that would be one that you could be satisfactorily fit to, or it could fit you? Let me rephrase that. So in other words, when is the customer going to be in trouble? They buy this very expensive bike. Is it bad to have it slightly too big? Or is that something that all of you could handle? Just a general answer. How about Justin?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally with bike sizing, there's this myth of the perfect bicycle, the platonic ideal. There's better and worse options in terms of how that allows you to get your handlebar and your saddle into the place that you need them to be. And, for instance, somebody comes in and they just bought a 54 Ethos and they've been riding around in a 56 Roubaix, and it's going to be hard to get the bars high enough. And run into that plenty of scenarios, but there's ways you can do it, and it's not going to be optimal. And unless somebody, I'm 6'4", unless somebody who's 4'10" tries to get on my bike, that's the wrong bike. That's wrong. But when it's only when you get to the extremes that it starts becoming a true problem. I think in general you're going to be able to make most things work, and if it doesn't work, if it's clear that it's not going to work, it's pretty obvious.
Okay, all right. Well, then it's up to the customer to try to get it right, or at least close.
To be just even like that's one of the things that I do a lot, is to help people navigate that process. And it's about narrowing the scope of options, and ultimately they need to go and test ride things, but it's really helpful for the customer to reach out to somebody like me or Revolution Fitness or any of us fitters and ask those questions in an informed, objective way, and be able to get some feedback on sort of narrowing the range, so that they're looking at bikes and like what's different between the different bikes, and it was really, really, really helpful. So I wouldn't put the burden on the customer at the outset.
I'm going to let Happy respond, and then I have a comment.
Okay, I think you have to look at more than just the seat tube. You also have to look at the top tube and the proportions of the person, because you can have somebody who's built like a T-Rex, long legs, short torso, short arms, and you get a good standover height, you're fine there. But the top tube's about 10 centimeters further than their reach. So you have to, you can't do it in isolation. You have to look at things in context.
Okay, that's a good point. All right, Rick.
Yeah, I just want to mention this also to the other bike fitters that are in the symposium here, is that now that there's more and more direct-to-consumer bikes, they're not going to the bike shops. They're doing it on their own and saying, hey, I went through their online tool and it says my inseam. Well, where are you measuring? Where is the tool measuring the inseam? Some are measuring it to the ankle, some are measuring it to the floor, and then they come in with the wrong size bike. At least Canyon, I see a lot of Canyons, and I'll say, well, okay, the first step in the bike fit process is take the bike back to Canyon and then come back with the right size. And luckily, they're just down the street and they can do that. But I've done that more than once. This bike isn't going to fit you, period.
Yep.
And so that's, just be careful of those customers coming in. I did my research, but the fact that you didn't know what the parameters were on the online fitting tools, you could be in trouble with the wrong size frame.
Okay, and Justin, did you have a closing? No? Yes?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I like what Happy said and what Rick just said are absolutely, particularly with things like Canyon. Canyon's brutal because their geometry is not super friendly. And people get into a bike that they think is what they want, but it's not like a Damani or a Roubaix. And it's not going to be a true endurance geometry, and they have the integrated handlebars, and the list goes on. But to Happy's point, it's holistic. There's no one measurement that's going to decide it. Bike sizing tools online are blunt at best, and being able to look at it holistically, come up with a solid bar XY number that as Pork says, ass and hands in space. We know, once we know where the saddle needs to be and where the bars need to be, and we have a good sense of standover, even using a sizing cycle that has no actual functional top tube, you can send them out with pretty confident info on test riding. So
okay, and I only have one really short statement. You guys are assuming that a person that goes into a bike shop can see a bike fitter, that there is a bike fitter that's close by, or someone in the bike shop knows of a bike fitter. I have talked to so many people who do not know what bike fitters do. Sure. And asking you to be the consultant before purchasing a bike is fabulous. But somehow or another, the connection between your service and the bike purchaser is not as strong as we might like. So
we definitely struggle with that and trying to get the word out to shops locally, at the very least. And I do video consultations with people, and that's actually been fantastic. Even just talking to somebody about it and being able to understand what their goals are can help narrow the field.
Right, but just even the cyclist, even having them aware that you exist. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I did not know about you guys. But anyway, that's a point that we could sort of deal with later because it's important.
So let me give Andy, give yourself a pat on the back. The last 6 bike fits I've had, people have come in and said, well, again, Southern California, we have a bike fitter on every corner. Okay, so, and the fact that they come in and say, I looked you up on the IBFI, you're a level 4 fitter, I've come to see you. Andy, that's a lot to say about the IBFI.
Yeah, thanks. And that was one of the big driving factors when we started it. So way back in the early days, there was very little transparency with how well trained a fitter was. And there were a lot of people out there who created courses with really fancy names, and it made you sound like you're absolutely incredible when you've done 2 days of training. But you know, the reality is, as a consumer, you kind of want to be able to cut through all of that and see who's done a lot of training and who is maybe a little bit more junior or early career, let's say. And that's what we wanted to do. So we applied credits to the number of days that you've been in education and various other training experiences and things that would benefit you as a fitter. But this new common syllabus, I think, is another huge step forward, and that's going to make a real difference. Just to incorporate elements that historically haven't been taught and have been assumed. You know, I'm lucky enough to have been able to go down that traditional academic route as well. So I picked up things on anatomy, biomechanics, all those kinds of things that historically bike fit courses haven't taught. So, you know, to incorporate a little bit of that from an awareness perspective, and it kind of all links back to similar topics, but it's like the medical fitters. You know, you have to, as a non-medical fitter, know when you've reached the limit of your knowledge and refer out. That it's basic stuff. It doesn't change as you work your way up through those levels. Your knowledge is still non-medical. It just means you get to help more people if you're willing to refer out.
Okay, so we're going to move on to this next question. It's for Happy. Are you ready, Happy? Here we go.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Here it comes.
Okay. Now, this is sort of interesting. I'm not sure what the answer is myself, but when you notice, if you observe a cyclist during a fit who has a movement that's abnormal or a dysfunction, but
Okay, that's everybody.
Okay, well, hold on. But then you can't reproduce this problem during the physical assessment of the individual. I mean, in other words, it seems that the problem is bike related. What do you do?
I don't assume I'm going to be able to reproduce issues on an examination table, working on a floor. If it's something that appears on the bike, it may only appear on the bike. And if it's something that is intermittent on the bike, the question is, why is it intermittent? So what I'm looking at is a puzzle where what activates it, what doesn't. Then once we figure that out, it's how do I correct for it? Usually I'm finding most problems start somewhere in the pelvis. Leg length discrepancy often is the pelvis. Lower back pain, the pelvis. Foot pain, the pelvis. You may have a neuroma in the foot and think that's causing the pain, but it could also be coming from up above. So you need to eliminate causes, and you also need to look at how the person rides a bike. I'm a proponent of no one spot, no sweet spots, that you're mobile on the bike. In other words, you're shifting your weight where it needs to be as it needs to be there. So if you have, for example, a hip that hikes only under certain circumstances, it may be because you're back too far or you're forward too far, and you need to moderate the range you're traveling over or redefine the range. You may need to raise or lower the seat. I'm not a big fan of a very steep, aggressive geometry for non-competitive riders. Unfortunately, most of the bikes that come in today come in with a fairly steep head angle and seat angle, and people think I can ride it just as well as anybody else. But if you've got little pathological problem in your lower back, you can't ride that bike. As is most of the pros I see after the fact, meaning they're retired, have back issues, have knee issues, have shoulder issues, all from the posture and position that they were riding in. So you gotta, if you're patient, you'll find a solution to the problem if it's mechanical. If it's not mechanical and it's neurological, I don't do NCVs, nerve conduction tests. but there's a layer of examination that goes beyond where I'll go with a physical therapist or with an MD or with a chiropractor. You need to know that there are options out there to find answers to questions that you're producing when you're doing your examination. It's not who has the answers, it's who has the questions. That's how you get the answers.
Okay, Wendy? Unmute.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Happy. I think that's a great answer. What I'd like to add to that is that if I find something on the bike that I can't reproduce off the bike, if they don't have any of those symptoms with any of the tests that I do, I start smiling because I know that something I'm going to change on the bike will most likely change their pain. And then it's good, or discomfort or whatever it is, then it's going to be a very easy bike fit because I can change something right then and there, and that should take away their pain. Whereas if I'm finding stuff off the bike, I know it's going to be a process before we get them better. So if I find something that I can't reproduce and I can only reproduce it on the bike, then I know in my head that this generally is going to be a good situation for the rider because I can take that pain away quite quickly. Obviously, it depends on the situation, and every situation is different. But usually, if I can't reproduce it in any of my tests, then I know it's coming from the bike, and changing something on the bike will hopefully help them.
Okay, we're going to move to another question, and I'm going to start with Wendy. Here you go. I did look at a few of your papers, and I am somewhat familiar with this, but I want you to tell us what the differences are between using static, hybrid, and dynamic measures during a bike fit, and which one you would use when, and why.
Sure. How much time have I got?
Well, do your best, but why don't you just do the static and dynamic? So please define what those are for the audience.
Sure. So that made up the majority of my thesis, and I have published a couple of papers on that. Static, if we look at static, it's very just one-dimensional. So it's taking measurements of the body when the rider is not riding, when they are static. So when they're standing still, sitting still on the bicycle, positioned still on the bicycle. And dynamic would be a more full model. So looking at it in different planes, so your sagittal, your frontal plane, all of that. And as much as we think that riding is just flexion extension of the knee, going forwards and backwards, there is a lot of rotation that happens. I think most of our problems, if we look at the knee, don't come from flexion extension. They come from that dropping in of the knee or pulling out of the knee. And that's the rotation. And so the static might miss some of those if you're doing just measurements statically. So from a research point, we know that the static measures are reliable and they are valid. And most of them are done on the knee. And we know that the knee flexion angle should be optimized between 25 and 35 degrees of knee flexion with the pedal at the bottom dead center. Closer to 25 for performance and sort of 30 to 35 for injury prevention. And that has been researched a lot. There's still a lot more research coming out, but it's all sort of summarizing the same thing, that 25 to 35 degrees statically. If we start looking at it dynamically, so now the cyclist is moving, there are a lot of variables that come in. And that would include their style of riding. It will include any abnormal biomechanics or normal biomechanics, and it will include the intensity at which they are riding. So from my research, we know that at a low intensity versus a high intensity, you are going to get a different knee flexion angle. That knee flexion angle changes with the intensity that they are riding. So just sort of to summarize, what we've always recommended is that you start with a static fit. A static, you're going to use a goniometer or an inclinometer. It's easy to use. It's a much cheaper system to use. It's reliable. It's easily repeatable. And there's a lot of research to back it up. So for a standard bike fit, I think starting with a static fit is a great start. And if somebody is more complicated, or if they have a more injury, or even if they're really looking for those extra few watts, you might want to move on to a dynamic assessment of your cyclist. And there are a lot of systems, there's a lot of technology that's coming out, and it's almost coming out faster than the research can prove that it's valid and reliable. And so for that system that you're using, you need to use their recommendations, because it's going to vary depending on what system you use, where you're putting the markers, what your experience with the markers is, what your quality and calibration of your cameras are. So you really need to know the system that you are using if you're going to use dynamic, as well as it's going to take you an extra 2 hours, if not longer, if you are using the dynamic. Does that answer everything? Because I can keep talking.
Well, no, we'll get back to that. I'm sure you'll have a chance to respond, but it is important because when people go to fitters, they'll see, some of them will have, you know, all the flash and dazzle of the computer systems. And some of them will be doing things with, you know, goniometers and handheld devices. And the inclination of the customer or client is generally that automated is better. You may not agree with that. I don't think I do. But anyway, Rick, and then I'll get to you, Happy. Hold on.
Yeah, so a couple things. I've actually coined a phrase, hybrid fit, as well. So you get the static, which is like Wendy alluded to. You have the goniometer, you stop the person, you get the ankle, the foot at the right, and then you take the reading. The dynamic would be a fully like bike fast fit on a iPhone or iPad, where it tracks the movement, or like the Shimano bike fitting is three-dimensional. That would be dynamic, where it does the measurements real time. Where the hybrid is where most people, I think, are using, where they would take the video, download it to Canovia. So they're doing the real time first, and then they're doing a static fit based on the Canovia program. So it's really a hybrid of the two systems. And that was the first thing. So you can even further differentiate between, there should be 3 systems, as we just alluded to. The second thing is that anytime I've gotten usually anybody higher than 30 degrees in the saddle, they start complaining about they're too high, they're pulling too much on the back of the knee. So for Wendy, what type of people are you fitting at 25 degrees, which is almost straight up? And what advantage are they seeing at 25 degrees than 32 degrees, for example?
Yeah, so it is a big range. It's 10 degrees. And where are you within that range of those 10 degrees? Are you closer to the 25, or are you closer to the 35? And I think a lot of intrinsic factors would come into that. So what is your flexibility like? You know, you can have a high performance athlete who says, okay, well, I want to perform, I want those extra watts, so we're going to push to 25, but maybe they don't have the flexibility to get there. And this is where you need to understand the research and apply it, because we can't all get everybody into those normative ranges. And even if the system says, yay, they're in that range, how's the cyclist feeling within that range? So if I have a high performance athlete and I think, okay, well, 25 to 30 would be his optimal range, and he can't manage that, I'm not going to push him there, because that's going to potentially give him an injury. So it really comes down to each individual case and what their intrinsic factors, so their flexibility, their training history, how they perform on the bike, any previous injuries, all of that is going to affect where I put that saddle height, as well as their pedaling style. You know, some people pedal with their toes pointed, some people pedal with their foot flat, and that's just something that they've learned. Yes, we know that that could be cleat position, we know that that could be saddle, but if everything is accounted for, it could just be their style of pedaling, and that will definitely affect where we put that saddle height. So those are recommendations. We know that the static, as I said, are valid and reliable, but once again, they're recommendations, and you know, things change. People might travel to races and they might have to travel very far, like your Kona athletes, and suddenly their hamstrings are tight because they've been sitting on an aeroplane for so long, and then they can't manage that extreme saddle height. So a lot of things that we need to take into consideration when we do put people at different saddle heights.
Okay, I'm going to go with Andy, and then I'm going to come to you, Curtis. So hold on. All right, Andy.
Okay, so I have kind of two things to mention here. Firstly, from the IBFI side of things, I think there's an education correlation here with kind of recommended ranges and this whole static versus dynamic debate. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do as an industry is step a little bit beyond those recommended ranges to tailor it to the individual, which is, you know, something Wendy's really trying to emphasize with the caveat alongside that recommended range. So in the common syllabus that we now have, instead of trying to get people to identify a range of knee angles that work and just set the saddle height so that they get that knee angle, at level 1, for example, which is the first level of course, the entry level course, we're trying to teach people to look for things that identify when the seat has gone too high. So it's not a pure knee angle driver. It's there's 4 of them. It's kind of coming forwards on the seat can indicate that the seat's gone too high and the rider is trying to reduce it themselves. It's a lack of stability on the seat. It's a decrease in symmetry left to right. So a key thing we're not talking about is it's really important to look at both sides. And then finally, it's a significant increase in plantar flexion. So, you know, if you steadily increase the seat height and they're absorbing it at both the ankle and the knee, and then you get to a point where they absorb it almost entirely at the ankle, that's a really good indicator that you've gone too high. So if we can teach people that those are the 4 of the indicators that the saddle has gone too high, then you can identify those in multiple ways. You can use technology, you can use your eye, you can use different approaches within technology. So that's my first kind of IBFI thing. The IBFI role is entirely voluntary. So to pay the bills, I need a day job. That day job is with a company called Cyclologic, and one of my roles within that is as a consultant for a tech company. So I sit on kind of both sides of this fence, and I can tell you that my approach as a sports scientist using technology and systems to measure and identify joint angles is not purely that I want to set someone with a knee angle of X. That's my least consideration. What I'm interested in is how has the person absorbed the change? Can I quantify that? And can I identify left to right? And sometimes these changes are so small that it's very hard for me to identify those changes purely by eye. So the technology motion capture systems that we use as fitters are there to extend what we can see and what we can measure, not just to guide, yes, this seat height needs to be this near.
No, that's an important point. I'll go to Curtis and then Happy. I see you, so don't worry. We're getting
I don't.
You don't see you. Okay, go ahead.
Don't worry.
Okay, good.
First, I want to really highlight something Andy just said, because for I think all of us in the room, there's not an optimal number. Even for an individual, there's not an optimal number. So how do you decide whether that seat height should be 30, 35, 40? How do you decide whether a back angle should be 45, 50, 60? And what Andy just said is you look for things that tell you when they're in the right range. So other markers like, well, Andy just listed out some great ones for seat height. So you just have to be able to look, listen, and feel into your measurements. The cyclist just said, you know, my pelvis is rocking, and you see the hips are rocking and the toes are down. So what are the feedback loops? What are the other objective and subjective measures that say that this person should be at 35 versus 30? And you've heard from the initial evaluation that, oh, they've got, you know, hamstring problems or they've had low back pain. So you have to be able to have other insights besides for numbers. Because if we keep chasing numbers, we're going to end up in the wrong place for people. What are the things that tell you you've gone past that line? That's number one. Thank you so much for saying it, Andy. And then number two, just coming back to the original static versus dynamic. I see a lot of people believe that just because there's a lot of data sitting there with a dynamic measurement, all kinds of beautiful flashy numbers, that it means that they've gotten a good fit. And probably one of my favorite sayings is the sharpness of a scalpel does not make a good surgeon. Doesn't matter how many toys, the pressure maps and the video captures that bike fitter has. I would much rather have someone with a good brain doing a static fit as opposed to someone that's just started this process and fits everybody into a box, doing a spectacularly dynamic fit. So think about the quality of the person. And again, hats off to you, Andy, for starting to get these standards out there and for people to be able to say, oh, I have IBFI level, 1, 2, 3. So thanks for that. So think about not the quality of the toys, but what does that fitter really know?
Those are good points. Happy, do you have something to add?
Yeah, yes, I do. First off, most people in a bike shop don't know how to find the landmarks for a goniometer. They're not going to consistently
True.
hit the right spots. Second off, Wendy was mentioning cameras and markers, which means she was using a motion capture system. There's an argument there of how many cameras do you need for an optimum job. I worked in a lab with a 14 camera system that we could integrate with EMGs and all the other technology. Did not improve my outcomes from doing a manual fit. When looking at knees and range of motion for making decisions, one of the main issues for most of my patients was that's measuring for a discharge point, not for a functional riding position. You're looking to see range of motion so you can send them on to somebody else or let them go without you. You got to look at things practically. If you look at a joint in isolation, you don't know how it's working with its neighbors. So looking at a knee without paying attention to the hip is kind of useless. If you're looking, you need to see how they play together. So I try to look at 2 or 3 joints at a time, not at one static measurement, or for that matter, one active measurement. It's the integration of the rest of the body that makes it a practical measurement.
Okay, is there anyone else that wants to comment on this? No? Okay. We're going to move forward then. This is an interesting question. A lot of you are doing this as part of your career, I guess, making money somehow. And so when a person comes in for a bike fit, many times, at least on websites, I'll see information like you can have a partial, you can have a level 1 bike fit, or you could have a level 2, maybe a 3, and maybe a medical. And so as someone who is a little familiar with bike fits, I would have trouble, at least as the consumer. The consumer is probably going to gravitate most often to level 1, at least to start. And so when you do a bike fit and you have someone come in, how is it that you manage these levels, and are you comfortable providing a bike fit at a specific level? What defines your level, and when do you stop? Do you stop? Or do you feel compelled to mention to them, well, there's this and this that you could have us look at if you decide to have a more advanced fit? So how is it that the bike fitter navigates this terrain? And I am going to direct this toward Curtis to start.
We actually, when someone calls in for a fit, we try to help them figure out what their needs really are. I just ride down to the end of the block with my kids, and I get a little bit of knee discomfort, but I'm not on the bike for more than 10, 15 minutes at a time, or just ride to work and it's 10 minutes away and I don't have any discomfort. Oh, great. A level 1 fit's probably going to be more than enough for you,
Okay.
an hour fit, versus, oh yeah, I race competitively. I've been having, back pain for some time now. I've had 2 fits already that have been a couple of hours. So those are kind of the extremes. So what are the needs of the client when they call in? And then from there, it gets a little fuzzy in the middle of all of that. But I would say that if someone doesn't have discomfort and has short rides, then it's more toward the 1 hour-ish fit. And if they've got a lot of pain or discomfort, or they've been through multiple fits and need more of a medical or biomechanical perspective, or get out more tools and evaluation devices, then more toward the 3 hour fit, where you get a PT involved and a fitter involved. That'd be
And
my
so that's determined in a pre-interview. So you're doing this interview is a key part of most of your fits.
That's correct.
Before
And
you actually
sometimes that's
start.
an easy thing to do for someone that calls in on the front desk or emails. And what we're doing now, actually, with most of our fits, is Justin will get on the phone with them, for 10, 15, even 30 minutes to help before anything happens, and help them determine, what their needs are, what fit is going to fit them the best, and set up expectations for what we can accomplish and not accomplish. So yeah, that's before they walk in the door. Usually we try to get them in the right service, as opposed to we're 1 hour into a fit and we really needed a 3 hour fit process here. And that just gets really messy for everybody.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So if you're out there and you're looking for a bike fit, I think you should ask for an interview first, at least to try to set up the parameters. Rick?
Some of the going through some of the fitters' websites, kind of putting together this these questions, it became apparent that there are different levels. And I think the question was more in tune with, like, a level 1 would be something that Curtis was recommending. I go down to the corner and back. But then when you get into a level 2, it's a full fit minus the cleats. And a level 3 might be a full fit, including the cleats. So my question, the question kind of alludes to, how good of a bike fit can you do if you're not doing the cleats, but doing everything else? But there are a lot of those types of segregated fits out there that people are purchasing and going forward. So thoughts
I think you
on
can
that?
see in my expression what I feel about that.
Let's go with Wendy on that one.
Yeah, I don't think you can do a bike fit without looking at their cleats first. Just in one sentence. Yeah, like, I think it's such an important aspect of the bike fit. I think any contact point that you have with the bike, you're going to struggle to do a complete or a good bike fit without addressing the contact points of the bike. So maybe you're not going to look at the ankle, or you're maybe not going to look at the hip in great detail. You're not going to completely ignore it. You're going to look at the whole body. But I don't think you can do a good bike fit without addressing the contact points on the bike.
Yeah.
Okay, Happy?
There we disagree. I think you have to check the shoes to make sure they fit properly. I think you have to check the cleats to make sure they're not broken, they're not loose, they're all there. But I do not feel that I want to necessarily change the cleats at the beginning of a bike fit, or necessarily even at the end. If I'm getting them to the position we want them, in other words, correcting posture and airway to achieve what we're looking at, I often get the results I'm looking for without touching the cleats. If there's a problem in the next week or two, by not having adjusted the cleats, I can determine whether it was the adjustments in the torso, the adjustments in the glutes, the adjustments and with changing muscle groups that we are firing, that enables me to go back to where we were and re-engineer this by leaving the foot where it is. If I've changed the feet, I don't necessarily know the origin of the complaint other than the point of contact. So by starting without touching the cleats, I can normally eliminate 98% of the complaints, and 1 or 2 a year come back, and we then go back to redoing their cleats. But I want to make sure the upper body is stable and comfortable and doing what it's supposed to, and we're getting the right muscles to fire in the right sequence. If I change the cleats, I don't know where they were to where I'm trying to take them to. So it limits my ability as a fitter to make decisions based on what the evidence is that's in front of me. So I'm not a big fan of going straight into the cleats. I know a lot of people like
Let me
to,
just,
but
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, Happy. I'm just going to clarify. Just because I mentioned cleats doesn't mean I'm going to change them. I'm going to assess the cleats. And
Yeah.
if I think that that is something that's causing a problem, I'm not going to change it straight away. I'm going to put all the pieces of the puzzle together before I do that. So just to clarify, when I say, yes, we need to address the cleats, it's the shoe, it's the foot, it's the whole interface, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to make changes. It's the assessment of that. So just to clarify, because it sounds as maybe I put that across as I'm going to go and change the cleats immediately, and that's not what we're doing.
Many of our peers just rush in and change the cleats at the beginning because they're working under the misnomer of you're building a house and you need a solid foundation. Well, if you don't know what the house looks like, you sure don't know what the foundation is going to look like at the end.
Yeah. No, you need to assess it. And sorry if I made that mistake. I'm not going to change it immediately. I'm going to assess it and see if it needs changes and if that is something that's contributing to the reason why they've come for the bike fit. And I absolutely agree that you change one aspect at a time and then reevaluate. So, yeah.
Okay. And Justin?
Muted. Justin muted.
You're muted. It's okay.
Justin.
He's unmuting.
Yeah, I just wanted to surface again that, you know, it was sort of circling back to the original question too, the idea of the different levels of fit, and there's all this confusion around how services are described, and ultimately what I always try to cut down to is just time. You know, how much time do we need to accomplish the goals that are presented? And for that commuter that has a bike that they're riding, you know, a couple miles each way to work and their knee hurts and they're using flat pedals, that's probably pretty straightforward. We can make some progress on that in an hour. And if it starts, the more complexity starts building, the more we start trying to build in more time just to allow for testing and changes, because there's obviously interacting with bicycles isn't time free. It takes time to change things. But also just making sure to surface that bike fitting is a process and not a product. And the pernicious myth that you can buy a perfect fit and then walk home with that in your bike and everything and just put it away and you're good. You bought the fit. Oh, good. And I always, that's one of the things we found with the initial interview that's incredibly valuable, is just being able to really get people on board with the process, and making sure that we're baking in that expectation that you're going to be adapting and changing. And then, as it was mentioned earlier, you know, the person that we're fitting now is today. And in 2 weeks or in 6 weeks or in 6 months, when your fitness changed and your body changes, it's a different person, it's a different fit. And being able to account for that.
So those are good points. Yes, it doesn't stop once you walk out the door.
Nope.
It only starts, actually, is what I've seen. And did Curtis put your hand up? No? Yes?
Don't
No.
think so, or I've forgotten what I was going to say.
All right. No, that's good. That's good. No, these are informative for people who are interested in getting a bike fit. I mean, I think that's one of the things, if you're clarifying that in an interview, that it's a process, that's really important. And I know that some fitters obviously will do changes and then have them come back for a check-in, maybe 4 or 6 weeks after they've ridden a certain amount, to sort of describe how it's going and maybe tweak a few things. So we are all in a consumer world where everything is immediate. This is so far from that I mean, it's sort of like a sculpture, and it takes time, and your rapport with your clientele is very important. And I'll tell you what, as someone who sort of has gone through a bit of this on the other side, your outcomes can be magical. And you can change a person who's really not liking to ride their bike to someone who can't wait to ride their bike, because it's amazing. And I would like everyone to be able to appreciate what you guys do. I don't know how that can happen. It might be a mission of mine. I don't know yet. But your role in making cycling the kind of experience you had when you were a kid, you know, you're an adult now, and it should be the same. And it's often not. But I think if everyone got their bikes fit to them properly, that we could do that. Let's see. We can move into something that's a little bit different. And that would be, we're going to move. Okay.
Thanks for saying that, Susan. That means a
No,
lot.
it means a lot to me. I am like so passionate about this that it sort of is something I think about a lot, maybe more than I should, since I'm still working full time as a professor, which is really crazy. But that's a whole nother story. So the bike fit industry. Okay, so this is where I kind of wonder. So I want to ask a question about, and I guess it's going to go to Rick, but he can start because this will go on a bit. And the question is, it's really straightforward. But do you think the bike industry is addressing the needs of cyclists?
The bike industry as a whole. So let me preface that with saying that any and all of these questions could be a full 2-hour discussion. But anyway,
Well, you have some time on this one.
some time. The bike industry as a whole. Give you a little story. To prove my point, I called our local, just down the street, we got Shimano America. Called them and said, why do you put 172.5 cranks on every road bike that comes out, regardless if it's a 46 or it's a 65 centimeter frame? And they told me, guess what? Curtis, what did they tell me?
Because it's the cheapest.
That's what the manufacturers are asking for. So I called Trek. I know some people at Trek. I asked one of the customer service guys, why are you requesting Shimano 172.5 cranks on every single road bike you produce? They tell me that's all Shimano offers us. So you get these two groups going like this, and things aren't going to move forward. I think somebody also alluded to it. The other problem in the industry, there's two more problems. There's number one is that they have this, well, that's the way we always did it, so why change? And the second one is that who do these manufacturers, Shimano and or Trek and Canada, but primarily the Shimanos and the SRAMs, who do they hire once they retire from pro cycling? They retire these guys that are, and Andy alluded to it, I think, or Curtis alluded to it, was they like these 140 stems. They like the long top tubes. They like the short stack on their bikes. They like the 175 to 180 cranks. And guess what the consumer gets? Because that's what a bicycle should look like. So I'm going to start that's what I experienced in the industry. That's what I see time and time again. And Wendy talked about the touch points of the bike. I kind of joke with customers that come in, I'll say, oh, you only got 2 of the 3 wrong, or that you got the trifecta. You got the too long a stem, you got the too narrow saddle, and you got the cranks that are too long. Guess what we got to change? So anyway, I don't think the bike industry as a whole is doing a great service to the types of people that are, very few of us are World Tour pros. We don't need World Tour Pro bike setups. Okay. Number 2 is that I think we are doing things now as bike fitters to maybe help change it from the back end, maybe going forward. One more example, my bike fitting classes, I do 4 times a year. All of my students are now PTs. It's incredible. I'll get 6 to 8 students 4 times a year, and they're all PTs that are now seeing the number of injuries that cyclists are experiencing and they're trying to do a continued level of care and get people go ahead and fix them physically and then get them on the bike correct. Because if you fix somebody physically, put them on an ill-fit bike again, they're just going to re-injure themselves and come back to the PT, and just it's a never-ending process. So in essence, that's what I see. So I'll pass it off to the next person, and maybe your experience is different.
Okay, Happy, are you raising your hand?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I see it.
The short answer is no, they're not serving us. There are a number of problems which start with bike design. When I was a kid buying a bike, bikes came in anywhere from 11 to 12 sizes from a manufacturer. Today you get 4.
Yeah.
Why? Carbon fiber is made in a mold for most factories, and molds cost over $100,000. The guy who welded them in steel probably made $15,000. So he's cheaper than the mold. That's where we get started. The angles have gotten so aggressive and so steep that if you watch the tour, there are a lot more crashes than there used to be. People go over the front end because it's too steep. There are stems that are way too long, so your center of mass is forward of the front axle. People watch the rear end wash out because they can't get enough weight on short chainstays to hold them down. And now I can get started with the serious stuff. I mean, it's bike design is right now focusing on how stiff, how fast, how aero can we make them. The reality is they're missing the targets. You need to look at function. Are they breathing well? Are they getting good air exchange? We can look at that as an issue. And for the non-pros, it is a big issue. So take a pulse oximeter when you're doing a fit, put it on your clients, and watch where the numbers go. You'll see the more air they get, the less air they get, which means the sooner they're anaerobic. And anaerobic doesn't necessarily mean the whole body. It can be just the quads. It can be just the glutes. So you're not looking at if you're drawing blood to look at the lactate, you're not necessarily getting a good picture because you're looking at the whole body in one sample, not isolated samples. So you gotta, I'm not a Luddite, I'm not opposed to technology, but I think you have to judiciously apply the technology. In my lab, I have a pulse ox, I have a spirometer, so I can look at tidal flow.
Yep.
I can look at all the points of function when they're breathing. So are they doing us a service? No.
Okay,
They could be doing a much better job.
Much better.
they could. Curtis?
Yeah.
And then back to Justin.
I think Chris was clapping.
I think Justin raced first, but I've just got to say the industry certainly isn't catching up with where us fitters are relative to crank length and making sure that we have non-aggressive and aggressive positions or aggressive bikes, all kinds of things. I think the industry is falling behind what the consumer wants, and certainly what us fitters would like to see. And some things they're slowly catching up with. I've also just got to make a really quick point is a lot of times we blame these problems on the bike, and Wendy said this earlier. So many times the problem is actually living in the cyclists themselves, meaning that they're not doing their hamstring stretching or they're not getting their core strong, or we think that this is a bike problem when it's actually a body problem. How many of us have mobility exercises that we do before we go out and ride and do some stretching when we get back, or make sure that things are balanced. So I've just got to, if we're going to point the finger at the industry, just make sure that we're looking back at ourselves and we're doing all the other things besides for fitting to take care of the discomforts or the inefficiencies we have on the bike.
I agree with that. I do. Justin?
Yeah, and I just wanted to surface, I've worked in the industry for a while, and I think from general frame design standpoint, it's much better than it was. If you go back 20 years to the heart of the former 7-time Tour de France winner era.
You shall not be named.
Yeah, exactly. Everything that Trek was making was ludicrous in 99, 2000. I mean, it was just these insane Euro super long, super low bikes. And guess what? People went to try to ride those bikes and they were terrible. And all of a sudden everybody's buying 7s and Seratas because they want custom, they want comfort. And finally, Trek and Specialized figured it out and started to make bikes that were much better fit for people. So the bike frame sizing is better than it was. It's that component problem. And I just wanted to surface that Appleman Cycles is present here, Appleman cranks. And you know, the option of getting a 135 crank and a beautiful piece of machined bike art is a legit thing. And we even had them make a set of cranks for somebody who had a significant leg length difference, like 30 millimeter leg length difference and no functional ankle engagement, and get a 165 135 custom set, which is pretty freaking awesome.
Thank you.
You know, so there are things that are available out there, and I also just wanted to make sure we surface it in case we don't get to it, the crank length thing. Rick's paper on crank length that you did with your daughter is phenomenal, and every bike fitter needs to read that, and it needs to be more available. It's an incredible resource for answering those questions.
Okay, Andy?
Now
yeah,
so I think when you look at integration, that's where the big difficulty comes. So, you know, if manufacturers want to go aero, they want to go clean, they want to hide cables and feed them through parts of the tubes that just mean you can't make adjustments that you want to. And then, you know, if you actually look at how TT bikes have altered, you know, that those front end adjustabilities have changed massively. It used to be the case that you could move the pads like forwards and backwards a tiny amount, and then maybe you would have some spaces that give you 10 mil or more. Now, you know, there's 100 mil vertical stack on most high end TT bikes, and that gives you a much bigger fit window. So why aren't manufacturers, and this is what we should be challenging them to do as an industry, trying to come up with creative solutions that provide just as large fit windows for road bikes? Yeah. You know, I think there's creative solutions that can be discussed and made. That means, you know, I can't get slammed super low at the front end, but maybe I want that Madone that looks super slick and nice. Well, how does Trek as a manufacturer create a solution for me to raise that front end up a little bit so that I can look good going slow?
Integration is a bugbear.
Hats off. Look good going slow. That's what I'm all about.
All those integrated front ends.
Yeah, they're interesting. How about you, Rick?
Yeah, what started this whole thing, and I agree with Curtis, is that we hear this all the time, is that it's half the bike and half the body. The people don't do the core work. They don't support themselves. They, after maybe 20 minutes, are now slouching into the bike because they have no more strength to support their weight, and that throws the fit off. The first fit I had that got me started on this crank thing is this lady came in. She was a triathlete. She was on a 46 centimeter Willier tri-bike and had knee pain. I looked at her crank. She had 175 crank arms. Now tell me where the disconnect is there. What in the world are you putting a, you know, I see, I have a client coming in that's 6'7", and we're putting him up back down. Zinn put him on 220s, and we're going to put him back down to 175 because he has knee pain. And he's 6'7", and so that's it's so important. And I totally believe that the bike fit starts with the correct crank lengths. After you get the correct crank lengths, and everything else falls into place fantastically.
Okay, Happy.
You have to fit people where they are when they come in that day, because you can't assume they're going to do everything you ask them to for this fantasy fitness that they imagine themselves doing. You fit them where they are, and if they change, you adapt the bike, or you design a bike for them for some growth. I do not give recommendations for stock models. I give them a position which is a sustainable position for them to ride, and then we can swap bikes in and out of the position rather than relying strictly on the fantasy of where you want to be in 6 months.
Yeah,
And that's not an easy discussion, I would imagine.
and one more
It's
thing,
a-
I see to tag on to what Happy's saying, I'm seeing this a lot now where the clients will come in and they're stressed. And what I found out that the first thing to alleviate the stress, but two things. Number one is that if you have a dog, put the dog out in the shop. They love to talk about their own dogs and stuff. So that kind of lets them down a little bit. The number two thing is until I tell them the frame size is okay for you, they then relax and they all say, oh, I thought you're going to tell me my bike was too small or too big or that, and I have to get a new bike. So go through that first, get the people de-stressed as fast as you can, and then the bike fits go a lot simpler right after that as well. Is that right,
Okay.
Justin?
Yeah, no, fair. I mean, I never really thought about that like out loud. But as soon as you said it, like so many people are like, oh, I was so worried my bike was size. I
Yeah,
hear that
exactly.
so much. I didn't.
Well,
I
Curtis
hadn't
lets you
even
bring
really
Curtis lets
put
you
that
bring a
together,
dog in,
yeah.
right?
No, unfortunately, the gym we work in doesn't allow for dogs.
No, it really puts people, they start talking about, they're totally into the bike fit after that. They talk about their dog for a couple of minutes too.
I'll
And
show 'em
everybody's got a
pictures. I'll
dog,
show 'em
and
my
yeah,
dog
it just really helps them out.
Hey, did you have anything, Wendy?
Just like some silly stuff, but I always compliment them on their bike, or just something like, oh, your bike's, I love the color, or just little things
Yep.
can
Good
really
like
just
that.
go a long way with getting that rapport with your client, and just sort of trying to connect with them to reduce that small element of stress. I mean, there's obviously a whole lot of other stuff that we can go into, but just a friendly face and just try, oh, where have you been riding? What routes do you do? Love the color or something like that just helps a lot. And dogs are always great.
Can't argue with that.
Okay, I had some, all right, these are sort of, each of you will have an answer. Some of you will, maybe you feel overworked, maybe some of you don't. So I have a question. Have you ever, as an individual, participated in or organized an event focused on educating the public about the importance of a well-fit bike? And if you have, what was it? If you haven't, that's okay. But I'd like to hear what you have done or what venues you have pursued to try to educate the public about the importance of bike fits. So, Andy, you raised your hand, but then you took it down.
Oh yeah, sorry. It was just I just thought I'd be the first to raise my hand. But yeah, so when I first started fitting, one of the things I did to I guess raise awareness locally was organize club evenings where I contact the local clubs and say, you organize a space for me to talk. I'll bring all my equipment. We'll do a little demo of fit and do a presentation on an element of bike fitting. And that worked really, really well because I think it helps your client base feel more confident in you because they've seen you talk for an hour on your specialist subject and you've shown them that you're knowledgeable and hopefully competent. But also it kind of allows you a captive audience to be able to say, these are the reasons why you should get a bike fit. This is why it's really important. Because remember when I started fitting, 2010, that was what, 30 years after Happy started. But in the UK, at least, that was still fairly early in the game. There weren't that many bike fitters out there. It wasn't a standard thing to do. Now it's changed. I think the UK exploded in fit over the sort of 5-10 years after that. And so thankfully it is a little bit more common to get a bike fit as part of buying a high-end road or tri bike. Mountain biking, less so, unfortunately, but I think there are still benefits to mountain bikers getting fits. So that's one of the easier ways to try and reach out to the general public. I think Porrick, my boss at Cyclologic, we're talking about trying to organise an event next year connected to a big cycling event in Scottsdale, Arizona, where it will be, you know, a day, kind of like a bike fit / cycling science conference, but more aimed at the general public and participants for a cycling event. Because, you know, I think there's an information gap there that we struggle to make up.
Okay, and Happy?
Well, I do a lot of public events. One of my favorites is the 5-borough bike tour, where we've done a number of different events, putting myself with an physiatry resident set up with a booth. You come in if you did feel good on your bike at the end, and we decide, is it clinical or is it mechanical? And we do a quick workup and let them know what their needs were. And then the other thing I've done is the equivalent of speed dating. You've got 2 minutes or less to see somebody before they go line up at the start line to try to solve their aches, pains, and handling problems. And my record is 35 people in one morning before the start of an event. Some of them were done in the dark, but you crank them through with as quickly as you can, so you can see as many as you can, and it gives them a good opinion of bike fitting, many who've never even heard of what I do or have seen what I do. And some of the corrections are just postural. So we do events like that. I do club lectures. I do grand rounds at medical schools to teach the ortho groups, the physiatry groups, women's sports medicine groups, and others about what fitting can do and what fitting can't do. And it's a good way of finding your referral base if you do things like that. So anything I can think of to be out there in the public, I will do. I mean,
Okay.
I met Andy at CycleFit in London. Curtis and I met at Medicine of Cycling. So basically, I met Wendy there also, I believe. So I try to be as public as I can with what I do.
Yeah, that's important. I'm going to go with Justin, then Wendy.
Yeah, I mean, just seconding what Andy and both Happy both said. I think connecting with a club is a really great thing locally for people that are doing fitting, because it's contextual. It's people that are already sort of on board with biking at a higher level, or at least a more engaged level. And it's a great way to sort of directly connect with the people that are your client base. And it just has sort of reputational flow-ons that I think work really well. I also I have good connections in local bike shops, and I think that's an important thing to factor in, because it's a great referral network. It's on the ground. It's people that are directly confronting the practicalities and realities of buying a bike and challenges of riding a bike, and they talk to a lot of people in the cycling community that aren't as connected as bike clubs are. And just having some presence there has great benefits.
Okay, Wendy.
Yeah, I just wanted to, add my little bit, and definitely, as Justin mentioned, the bike shops, they are great people to have in your corner. I get a lot of referrals from local bike shops. They're the ones that are seeing the customers who are buying the bikes or who are complaining. And then also just on a smaller scale. So last week I hosted a workshop for female cyclists. This one was in particular for female cyclists. And I teamed up with a pelvic floor physical therapist as well as a personal trainer. And we just gave a small workshop. It was an hour and a half long, and really just sort of trying to push that education across. So yes, it was a marketing event for us, but it was also just educating the riders. In this case, it was the female riders, and just trying to build that team around you. So, working with other physical therapists, working with personal trainers, working with athletic coaches, and just trying to educate the public on different aspects of the bike fit. So you can do it small scale, or you can do it big scale, like I know Happy does. some of the bigger Philly Expo, the Bike Expo, and that. All great just to get that education out and to make awareness of what bike fitting does.
Okay, Rick.
Yeah, I see. I got 4 great bike shops around me that I've actually talked to a number of times. And like Wendy said, they're on the front line. They're the ones that the customers come in and buy the bike from. And anytime a customer, so I fit some of those people, so they see the advantage and can feel the advantage of a bike fit, of a correctly fit bike. And they can actually, in their own words, tell the customers the advantage of so I use them as an advertising wing as well. And I reciprocate the relationship by going ahead and sending those people back to that bike shop when they need other equipment like stems or cranks, and have them install it, and they'll come back and we'll do the final fit with that new equipment on the bike. So it works very well. It's a plus that we dual benefit on that, and the whole thing is you got to get a good shop that understands the benefit as well, and then it works really well that way.
Andy, I'll get to Curtis.
Yeah, so just thinking kind of more broadly about getting that message out there and connecting with the general public. I think one of the things that we could do through the IBFI is create industry-wide statements, let's say. So, Rick talks about crank lengths being too long on small bikes quite regularly. I think a lot of fitters would agree with that. There's nothing to stop us using the IBFI as a central body to pull that together. And then we get as many bike fitters as possible to sign that. And then when we put that out to the press and to the public, all of a sudden it raises awareness of bike fitting and issues at the same time. So we can do good for the broader cycling community without physically touching their bikes, maybe.
Curtis?
Got the first one, Andy. Generally, wearing underwear under your spandex doesn't work very well. We can all probably agree on that.
Yeah,
probably. We're pretty passionate about giving to the community YouTube content for bike fitting. I've done some lectures for UCSF on bike fitting that lives out there. Last month, we were at a bike shop doing a lecture. Next week, we'll be at a cycling club doing a lecture. Organized rides, setting up tents for a free fit and free musculoskeletal screens for cyclists, and even just going out on those rides, and anybody who's interested in some feedback. So that's really our intention, making a meaningful difference for cyclists, whether you can afford it or not, and getting out there to the community is just a win-win-win.
Okay, Rick?
Yeah, so there, I want to address Andy's question or comment, is that it's dual pronged. Is that yes, we can get that information through, but how much information do we want to get back to the manufacturers? Because if they fix all the problems, they won't need us.
Yes, they will.
Yeah, they will.
Okay, I have a final sort of question. It's a little bit odd, but okay, so all you guys are talking about fitting probably teens and adults.
No.
And so what I want to know is, is there an age of a rider that is too young to have a bike fit? You see kids who ride bikes who can't possibly sit on the seat. They're standing up the whole time, so they're building those glutes like crazy. But so that's an interesting thing to me. I mean, is there a point that's too early, or do you guys sort of let the little guys, futz around till they get serious? Or how do you define that? Because I think the experience of a younger rider could be greatly enhanced if the bicycle fits. Why wouldn't it? But is that just too ridiculous? I mean, so that's what I see. I'm just wondering. Okay, Happy?
Well, you can start with a balance bike and with kids. and get them on at the right height so that they're able to actually run around on them. But where it gets serious, I start with pediatric dwarfs. So you've
Okay.
got kids with physical issues on top of getting the size right to get them started. So our skill set is not limited by age on the bottom, nor is it at the top. I've done fits for bilateral hip and knee replacement patients in their mid 70s and 80s who want to get back on their bikes. So the
Right, so
answer is
I get the
yes.
answer is?
This better. The answer is if they're physically able, I'm willing to help.
Okay, all right. How many kids? So you other guys, I mean, have you fit? Wendy, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, you know, kids should be having fun. They should be playing around on their bike and just having fun. But that obviously doesn't take into account if there is an issue, if there's pain or if the bike doesn't fit. And I think the bike shop has a responsibility to sell them a bike that fits them. It also comes to a point of maybe the parents can't afford a new bike and maybe the kid has outgrown that bike. And so the bike is too small, but it comes down to a financial situation, or maybe they're waiting for their next birthday to get the next bike. In terms of what we do as pure bike fitters, I'm not going to take a 10-year-old and fit them for performance. Maybe it depends. It's all the situations. But I honestly believe that kids really should just be having fun on the bike. And yes, there are circumstances that we do need to address, and maybe they do need a bike fitter to come in. But there are a lot of other situations that could be causing, you know, them to stand and ride, and it could just be a financial thing that they can't afford a new bike. But I'm not going to do like a high performance fit
Right, no,
for a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old. That's, you know, but I can definitely give, and I think that's where the education comes in, and meeting the people on the ground, like chatting to the bike shops, and the bike shop can phone you and say, there's this kid and he's doing this. Can you speak to the parent, or the parent's part of the cycle group, and they might come and ask you some questions, as opposed to booking an actual bike fit.
right, right.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
do you?
as always, it depends.
No, I
Favorite
know
answer.
that. I know that. And so some bike shops actually do have an awareness of this, that kids grow very
Yeah.
fast. And they have, you can buy one, trade one in, and you can keep doing
Yeah.
that as long as your kid keeps getting bigger.
Fantastic.
And so those are really good programs. It's sort of a population, they're your future cyclists, you know, and I'm sort of always wondering, you know, in the United States, at least, I think in Europe, you guys have massively large numbers of riders compared to what we see. And the safety of riding in the United States is not good. And so most of them are riding mountain bikes, which probably isn't all that good safe either, but you know, that's what they're doing. And so there may be a difference in the UK and Europe in terms of how you guys are approached by families with riders. I mean, every kid that I was seeing over there was riding their bike to school. I mean, you know, there wasn't room for the playground because it was the bike parking lot. But we don't have that luxury here. So I was just very curious about how you can keep encouraging families to ride and kids to ride. And, you know, I would be very sad myself if road cycling kind of went, which it seems to be doing. But I can see why you wouldn't necessarily fit someone or try to, you might help someone if they had knee pain, or if their parents said, you know, they don't want to ride because their knees hurt.
Bingo.
You know, well, at that point, yeah, you bring them in, and guess what? I mean, it takes you 2 seconds to figure that one out. But anyway, that's an important thing, and I'm always interested in growth of the industry. I'm very sad that I don't see very many kids riding bikes. I do realize that riding on the road is absolutely crazy. And so I'm kind of at a loss. But Anyway,
If you go to Bentonville and you will see kids on bikes.
okay, all right. It's not very common. I'm in Greenville, South Carolina, so it's not bad. It's better than where I was, but yeah. So Rick and Justin?
Yeah, I don't see too many kids, juniors, but again, it's very important to get the juniors fit because as you PTs know, any injury you sustain as a young kid, it's going to carry, eventually going to manifest itself when you're 40 or 50, and then you get the full benefit of the injury you sustained when you're a kid, which you're assuming you're absorbing it. And it, like Wendy said, it depends on the age. Let's take a junior male. So there's a certain age where they're going to start shooting up about 1 inch every month in height. So it's hard to fit. So what I recommend is a subscription service for those parents, because what happens is they'll come in, or they'll go to the bike shop, and the kid will want a bike, they'll choose a bike, and then the parents go, what, I need a jersey, what, I need bibs, I need shoes, I need a helmet. Now you're doubling, so like when you said, it's hard to justify all those additional charges, and they'll opt for getting a size, maybe 1 or 2 sizes too big at that point in time, knowing that the boy will grow into it and they won't have to buy a second or third bike in the next 2 years to accommodate. So there's a lot of trade-offs, but I don't know if it's good or bad, but all of the kids now are on the Surons. So they're not going on the bikes, they're going on the e-bikes and the e-motorcycles and taking those to school. And those are basically set sizes. You can't fit anything to those. So that's where the trend, I think, is going now. I think still the trend is the average adult with the disposable income that can afford a bike. I got one client who's an attorney, and every year he buys himself a new Trek Madone. So it's always a constant thing. And he loves cycling. And now that we got him sorted out, it's the best thing. He's out there every day on the bike. That's the type of client we're looking for. The juniors, yeah, they're important, but I see less and less going forward.
And Justin?
Yeah, I worked in shops for a while too, and you see a lot of kids, and there's a difference. There's certain kids, they're kind of wobbly. They're not racing bikes. The goal with the bike is, can they put their feet on the ground and not fall over when they stop? It's not about fitting, it's about safety. And it's pretty clear when that line, when you start crossing that line, and it's developmental, and there's a certain point when they have enough sort of body awareness and strength and control neuromuscularly to be able to not fall over. And that's, you can tell. And so even certain kids, you get like a 6-year-old and you're like, this kid is dialed. Like then sometimes you see a 6-year-old, they can barely hold themselves upright just walking around. And it was really funny selling a lot of kids bikes and seeing a lot of different kids interacting with bikes. And it certainly varies, and certainly where we are here in the general Silicon Valley area, I go by a grammar school that's nearby here when I go riding, and there's like 200 bicycles in the parking. It's unbelievable how many bikes there are, and in that 3 o'clock window when school's out, it's just bedlam. All the kids on bikes. It's not all bad, but
good.
Definitely different.
And Curtis, did you have your hand up?
I did, but it's been said. I think the big summary is, if the bike is meeting the kids' needs, whether if they're riding down the block, it probably doesn't matter, and they're having a good time. And if they're 12 years old and they're racing, then making sure that it's at least in the ballpark. This is actually where sometimes a good enough seat height measurement that's based upon general flexibility or range can work.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been said.
All right. Well, I don't have any. Oh, well, I'm going to let Rick.
Yeah. So So we're coming up on 2 hours. I would like to propose one last question for the panel, directed at Andy first, and then we can kind of close. I think it was a very successful seminar. We went through a lot of stuff, a lot of good information. Appreciate everybody that attended today. It was fantastic. So I'm seeing, going back and kind of putting several of these little topics together. There was, let's say somebody comes in with a disproportionately, let's say a long legs, short torso, very long legs, very short torso female, where a certain size frame, let's say a small road bike, we can fit the saddle height, but the stem is going to be, they can't even reach the top of the handlebars. Number two is if we go down one size, we can maybe have a little bit, or the other way around, we maybe have more room or not for the saddle height, but it might basically almost fit the handlebars. So the question is, a bike that is set by the manufacturer, and again, Andy, part of your IBFI course covers the body, the geometry of the bikes, and this is kind of getting into that field. A bike from a manufacturer, let's say a 49 centimeter road bike with a 100 stem, how much difference? And there's a lot of times where I'll have to put a 35 millimeter mountain bike stem on so that female rider can ride it. And everybody tells me from the bike shops, oh, don't do it. You're going to destroy the whole handling of the bike. It's going to be unsafe to ride. It's not going to work. Yet you put that person on there and they say this is the greatest thing they've ever had, that now they can reach the bike. For safety wise, they can reach the controls, they can reach the brakes, they can, where before they were reaching so far that they couldn't even control the bike. So going that way, when you're exceeding the manufacturer specification from 100 to, let's say, 30 millimeter stem, what are you really impacting if the customer is happy and they can do tight circles and they can ride it comfortably?
So I think what we're talking about here is basically whether stem length impacts handling, I guess, is the summary. So stem length does, but stem length is one of the variables again. So a few years ago, I was talking to a graphic designer to try and make a video that illustrated this quite nicely. But essentially, what you need to think of is, imagine you're sat on a bike and you're looking directly down the center of the steerer. You need to measure the distance from there to where your hand is, because that's the thing that affects the handling. So yes, stem length makes that distance greater or smaller, but so does bar width, so does bar reach, and so does the length of the hoods. So when you combine all of those together, you get the distance away from the pivot point, which is the center of the steerer. So if that distance is huge, you physically move your hands quite a large amount to get a small amount of change in the wheel. If that distance is very small, the same physical amount of movement in your hand creates a much bigger movement in the wheel. Because, you know, as humans, we know how much our hands move. We don't know how many degrees that is in terms of rotation around the steerer. So it's all about steering input versus from your hands versus how much the wheel actually moves. So if we go super short and we've got a 35 stem, you mentioned that the bike was a 49 and otherwise it fit the athlete quite well. So potentially they're quite a small athlete. A female athlete may also have narrower shoulders. You could be looking at a 36 centimeter bar on that. You could be looking at a short reach because you put a 35 mil stem on there. So all of this factors in. It's not just pure stem length. But you're exactly right in saying that if you compromise handling, providing they can still ride safely, you can gain so much more in terms of comfort, in terms of being able to operate the brakes more effectively, or all those kinds of things. But for me, I think if I'm getting to a 35 mil stem or something that short, that's when I'm kind of saying, maybe this isn't the right bike and maybe we should look at something that's a bit shorter and taller. So it actually links very well to one of the questions in the comments from Ronit. He kind of said, something similar about, you know, if I've got someone on a size cycle and they could be on a race bike, but we'd be on a short stem and lots of spacers, or they could be on a more endurance bike and a more sort of stock size stem. It's kind of the same question. Ideally, you'd want them on something a little bit more stock length on stem, because that's what the manufacturer has designed the bike to handle with. But at the same time, the person needs to be comfortable on it. And if there isn't a bike that gives you a 49 centimeter size with a much higher front end, where are you going to go? Maybe a 35mm stem is the compromise that is the solution. So it comes back to Curtis's phrase of like accommodative fit. What if the accommodation you're making is that the bike doesn't allow the rider to get the position? It's not their body, it's the bike. So it's still an accommodation, it's just to something else.
Okay, I don't know who was first. I have Justin, Happy, and Curtis, but is Justin you? Curtis, go. We'll get there. We have time.
I think I've got a big picture one here. Is does the change, whatever it is, help accomplish the cyclist's primary goals? They've got low back pain. I shorten the stem up to 35mm. Their back and leg pain goes away. Does the change help accomplish the cyclist's primary goals, number one? And then number two, does that accommodation cause, or what does that accommodation cause in regards to other problems, or if it does? And if those other problems are making that cyclist less safe on the road, and Rick said, hey, I've shortened it up to 35mm and they can do tight circles. They can handle their bike. They're not racing in a pack. So does it help accomplish their goals, number one, and does the accommodation cause other problems that could be problematic, and especially in a safety way? So that's where I go with accommodations. I do all kinds of accommodations all the time, but then you have to think about what are the side effects, if you will, of that accommodation, and is that a problem?
Good.
Okay, Justin, and then Happy. I got you.
Yeah, I think, just from a fitter standpoint, the accommodations are really important. I think about this a lot in the context of trying to decide bikes, and I always think about the fit envelope that the bike is kind of designed around, because the manufacturer kind of has a stem in mind in predicting the handling of the bicycle. And the example that came up the other day is a bike where the client would need to drop down to an 80mm stem. On most road bikes with relatively road handling, e.g. mid-50s trail, that it's going to be a little twitchy at 80. But on a gravel bike that has 70mm trail, it's going to be fine. And so looking into sort of the whole picture of how the bike handles, and in particular because trail is becoming so much more variable with the range of gravel bikes and things that are out there, being able to come up with a bike where you can have an accommodative fit that doesn't compromise handling it's possible. It may not be that bike, but there are more solutions out there than there used to be.
Okay, Happy?
Okay, let's start with production bikes. Small sizes may have a C tube that's a 48, even a 46, but the top tube is going to be 49 to 52 centimeters because you put 700C wheels on it and you have a 170 crank to get clearance, so you don't get an overlap problem. You still need a longer top tube. So 99% of our production bikes have the longer top tube. If you see a bike that is designed for a 650 wheel, it can have a shorter top tube, give you more clearance. If you add a short crank to that, you can get even smaller, shorter top tube. But the most common people who buy bikes that small are women. And one of the problems with this is you get a woman who's postpartum. She has a bunch of relaxin in the system. She wants to ride a bike to get fit. You can put her on a bike with a 54 centimeter top tube, and she's flexible enough to reach there, but she's not strong enough to hold it there. So you have to really look at what is the proper bike size. And it's usually smaller and shorter in the top tube and possibly taller in the head tube than you're going to find in a production bike. There are a few exceptions, but I'm not selling anybody's bikes here today, so you can find them, but you got to look for the smaller wheel and smaller top tube to meet that client.
Okay. Is there anything else? Rick, do you have any final comments?
No, let's go around the around the ring here once, and any final comments? I think it was a fantastic time with everybody. Again, I thank everybody and appreciate you coming. There's going to be another one Saturday for those interested. So Sue, why don't you go ahead and let me just pass it over to Justin. Justin, any final thoughts and final thoughts?
I appreciate the opportunity to do this, Rick. Thanks so much. It's I like in theory speaking to an audience that's more fitter focused. I just want to reiterate that article you wrote on crank length. I think that everybody needs to read that does bike fit, and it's just I appreciate this. Thank you,
Andy. Thank you, Justin.
I think it's been really positive. Everybody's contributed some really great information, and hopefully if you keep going and you set specific topics for each webinar, this can be a series that has a lot of success for a long time to come.
Wendy.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's always good to discuss bike fitting and share ideas in that. And I think just to summarize everything, it really depends on the client in front of you. And we have these general answers, but we really need to be very specific and individualized to the client that is standing in front of us. What are their goals and how can we help them? So yes, these are great topics and they're very worthwhile discussing, and they give us the guidelines to help our client. But as every answer starts, well, it depends, and it depends on who's in front of you, and I think that's the most important thing. So yeah, great job. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm happy.
The thing you have to remember is you're fitting the person, not the bike. We're not bike fitting. We're fitting people.
Right.
Bicycles don't complain if it doesn't fit. The rider does.
Yeah. Curtis.
And just to follow up with, well, first just to say thanks for everybody who's watching either live or not live, because if you want to do the things we're talking about, which is fitting the person, you need to be able to learn, and learning is what you're doing now. So thanks for everybody who's watching. Growing your education is what it's all about, so you know what questions to ask and what tests to do. And so that's something we really focus on, is just helping you learn and grow. And thank you, Rick, for putting this together to help people out there learn and grow. And again, Andy, for IBFI. Big picture, I think that is my big picture. Keep learning and growing. There's a lot of stuff out there. Find yourself a mentor, find yourself a group, an organization you like to learn from, and just keep diving in. And hats off for taking that time to serve your client better, because you can do better when you know better.
Good. And lastly, Sue.
It's been a real pleasure to meet you all. I hope to meet you again and perhaps share our interests in what sorts of things I think about. But I enjoyed this a lot, so thank you for participating.
I'll see you Saturday.
Well,
You will.
good. Appreciate everybody coming, and the audience as well. And we will be pushing this out to YouTube. Again, if you want this, just let me know. We'll send you a copy of the video.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.